Welcome to Trilogy Tuesdays, a series in which I go back and look at some of the most popular movie franchises and review them, as I have a movie channel, and I just want to. Today we're looking at the Kingsman Trilogy, created by Mark Miller and Dave Gibbons. You know, that series with all those action shots that people re-upload to TikTok for views because they look really cool. It's honestly up there with that one card scene with Now You See Me Too, with how many times it's been re-uploaded. Originally being a comic series under the same name, this adaptation is a meta commentary on the spy genre, and quickly evolves into something much more, with the franchise accumulating close to $1 billion in the box office alone. And for it to be viewed as such a revolutionary step in the genre, it would almost be a disgrace to not visit this unique series. Starting off in release date order, we have Kingsman Secret Service, the classic origin tale that has us following our ragtag protagonist in Eggsy. Yes, his name is Eggsy, an edgy yet kind-hearted and talented soul who wants to put out real good in the world, but because of his harsh environments and lack of dedicated role models, he grows up with all the wrong influences in his life. He finds himself in a unique predicament when he crosses paths with Harry Hart, aka Galahad, a distinguished and cunning friend of Eggsy's late father who is a member of a private spy organization known as the Kingsmen. I'll explain them later, but just know that they're a bunch of suit-wearing super weapons who seemingly can't be hit, well, unless the plot demands it. Eggsy's father saved Harry's life 17 years prior at an unfortunate cost of his own, so Harry has been dedicated in making up to him and his family ever since, and he believes that the best way to do so now is by channeling Eggsy's potential so that he himself can become a Kingsman. Quickly, one can recognize that these films are pulling heavy inspiration from spy/action thrillers of the past, from the Bonds to the Bournes, but doing so in more of a meta-comedic point of view. Multiple references to the idea of being a spy movie itself, with acknowledgement of themselves embodying every trope out there, such as pulling the trope of having a down-on-his-luck kid be taken in and given proper guidance so that he can become something greater, and then acknowledging other stories that follow that same pattern as well. The main antagonist of the film was Richmond Valentine, which I have personally been debating on if it was purposely done or not to sound like rich man. Get it? Because he's rich and he's a man. Richmond. Yeah, it's kind of a stretch for a stupid joke, but I wouldn't be surprised if actual thought was put behind it. A fact that is so clearly evident the more that you watch this franchise. Valentine is a successful tech guru who is set to recreate the world from scratch, as he believes that humans are the plague of the earth, being the basis behind all of its problems. His plan is just to wipe the slate clean by planting chips that will make everyone that hears a specific frequency fall into a blinding rage, thus making them kill each other, while a select few government officials, wealthy persons, and a couple of betraying Kingsmen can just wait aside and lead the eventual new world when it's all said and done. It's a very dark plan that symbolizes the corruption of wealth and how money and status holds too harsh of a grip on our society, to the point that some actually start believing that they're above human or gods themselves. It's just very anticlimactic when you realize that it's coming from Samuel L. Jackson in the snapback doing his best Mike Tyson impression. The thing about meta-comedies or any type of meta-cinema is that there's a right way to do it, and then there's definitely a wrong way to do it. Like, some people can just excuse a bad movie just because they say it's mimicking something else, and that's just supposed to be it. Saying, hey, our movie can't be bad because we're making fun of someone else's movie for being bad. But then your movie is still bad. The meta aspect should be used as more of a gateway to more introspective ideas rather than just a cop-out for your movie being cheeks. That's what I appreciate in this first Kingsman installment, in that it embraces the meta aspect instead of lazily tacking it on, and even tries to develop this idea that we can see that this has elements of a typical spy movie, but just give us a chance to show you that we aren't. Kind of. Like, there was a scene with Galahad in which they were setting him up to seemingly have this great hero exit by beating the odds of being outnumbered and coming out on top, but then he just dies. Murked in the head with no warning, no flashbacks, no extra scene showing that he survived and is held at a secret containment field somewhere else. Just dies. It's playing around with our ability to identify these common tropes, then actively working against it. Again, this film knows what it is and embraces it. It uses that meta-ness to create genuine comedy, to better highlight those more serious themes, by masking it with these madcap character traits, and I think that many would agree with the most, is that it helped contribute to some of the most creative action sequences in the history of the spy genre. If the Kingsman franchise is known for anything, it would probably be the insane theatrics they pulled to separate themselves from the rest of the competition, because they don't have to be as realistic as the others. Exaggerated movements and unique weaponry contribute to making hits look 10 times more brutal and entertaining. You also see those unconventional shots that always have your eyes moving from one place to the next, such as first-person views of characters and actions, a constantly moving camera that makes it seem like the viewer is maneuvering around the fight itself. This one effect in particular was pretty neat, in which they seemed like a mixture of motion tracking along with a shaky camera, giving this viewer this sense of urgency or high alertness that of course comes in the heat of a life or death situation. The best way you could probably put this is that it's a very interactive experience, with the best comparison probably being something like Spy Kids movies of all things, except way more gory. Eggsy is definitely a solid character to build around, having those classic protagonist traits such as being charming, quick-witted, and genuinely entertaining. Taron Egerton really plays up the role of a lovable a-hole, although I don't know if it's a time thing being filmed before 2014. I don't know if it's a British thing or if it was just a part of the joke, but it's like they looked up the most bad boy outfits on Google and just went crazy from there, because they got my boy in the most atrocious fits I've ever seen in my life. I know it's supposed to be a metaphor for his delinquency before he finally gets his Kingsman suit and views himself as a worthy gentleman, but come on man, at least take the stat back off my boy's head. The movie ends with Eggsy apprehending Samuel L. Jackson's base, killing every rich person in the 10-mile radius, and saving the world from having Noah's Ark Part 2. Also getting a bit handsy with the Princess of Sweden, if you know what I mean. Kingsman Secret Service is a movie that makes more sense when you realize that it was developed by two guys at a bar who just thought that spy movies were way too serious. Funny enough, the alternative to him making this film was directing X-Men Days of Future Past, a pretty grim movie that quite literally sees us watching all of our beloved X-Men characters get murked by Sentinels. With both films finding success in their own right, I am glad that the efforts were focused into making this, but it ended up being debatably the most unique interpretation of the genre since something like the Austin Powers trilogy. And with the over $400 million made in the box office, a sequel was everything but guaranteed to happen. Kingsman: The Golden Circle. Now this movie is regarded as a heavy drop-off from the original, and I can't really see why. Sure, it has a ton more questionable decisions and it feels like an off-brand version compared to the original, but I still see myself having a ton of fun when watching it. I would even argue that if you've ever seen a clip of Kingsman material before, knowingly or not, it would more likely be from this movie. While the original is captivating in its own right, don't get me wrong, the sequel introduces way more gadgets and tech into its everyday scenes, making it a bit more appealing to those who are watching from the outside looking in with no context to the series whatsoever. You even have the legendary country road scenes taking place during this installment, but I'm not going to sit here and lie like it was the same quality of the original, because it just wasn't. We start the film off with the action sequence, as this movie definitely knows what its strengths are. Between Eggsy and a former Kingsman in training, Charlie. I didn't mention this earlier, but in the original film, Eggsy went through a whole training program arc against a group of other Kingsmen in training, where he basically was like the odd man out, as he was the only one not formally trained beforehand. I didn't really mention it as most of the people involved were so unimportant to the story. I only remembered like 4 people's names, including Eggsy. Charlie got booted for not being committed to the cause, and after losing an arm and vocal cords to Eggsy, he is now back for revenge under a new organization. As far as Eggsy himself, he is now a year into his Kingsman career, looking better than ever, except his non-Kingsman fits are still atrocious. He lives his everyday undercover life, adopting the house of his late mentor Harry Hart, and is now dating the Princess of Sweden that he messed around at the end of the last movie, which I personally have a lot to say about that relationship. The plot of this movie follows the Kingsman organization as they build back up from the ground, thus following an attack that kills every single Kingsman except Eggsy and tech support named Merlin, which after going from like the first movie, which involves corruption within the Kingsman, to the second movie about corruption within the Kingsman, this super secret organization isn't looking too super or secret. To combat the loss of almost every single Kingsman member, they activate the emergency protocol, the Statesmen. The Statesmen are the United States brother organization to the Kingsmen and pretty much embody every American stereotype, which I don't know how to feel being on the opposing side of those jokes, but through the Statesmen we do get more information in regards to their origins of the Spy Club, as the founder of the Statesmen got his suits from the Kingsmen in fact. The Kingsmen of course going into clothing and the Statesmen going into the brewing field. To explain the money behind such creations as an electric whip, the Statesmen also reveal that Harry is alive. Yeah, effectively counteracting one of the better heart-wrenching moments of the original film by just bringing him back. He served his role as a source of guidance for our original protagonist and provided a death that made sense thematically, so why is he here? They even had a good thing going on with him physically being there, but with amnesia from being shot in the head, and even that was settled not too far into the film. But hey, he's back and is ready to join the Kingsman and Statesman team up as they figure out who is behind all of this chaos. Speaking of chaos, the big bads of this movie are the Golden Circle, a very powerful yet anonymous drug cartel that is led played by Poppy Adams. She's a wealthy yet lonely lady who wants to go public as she's been secluded a good part of her life, but she can't, as you know. Drugs are illegal. So her plan is to lace all of her products with a lethal toxin and not only extort her freedom, but demanding the end of the war on drugs in exchange for her cure. The only problem though, the president doesn't care. He views it as his eventual triumph over drugs, leading this to be on the backs of Eggsy and the gang. This is a pretty personal mission too, considering that not only is a good couple of millions of the population fallen ill, a fellow statesman has fallen ill as well, one of Eggsy's friends has fallen ill as well, after another one was murked earlier in the film. But most importantly to Eggsy himself is that his girlfriend, Tilde, has fallen ill. Alright, so I feel like this is the better time than ever to mention that I don't like this couple. Like, at all. It feels like a forced pairing of something that many people didn't think would carry over to another movie. Like she was supposed to be a temporary hookup for a protagonist for saving the world, and then he was supposed to move on to something else in the next film. But no, they actually get together in the next film. They end up spending more time on bad terms than good, with her spiraling because of the obligations he has as a spy, such as keeping a low profile, being away for long periods of time, and being put into uncomfortable situations. All things she knew he had to do, yet continued to have a relationship with him. Add on top of the fact that her family only knows a watered down version of him, and that they have only really known each other for about a year, and then they decided to get married? Again, they just gave her the screen presence of something that was supposed to be a one-night thing, and Eggsy would eventually end up with someone else in the long term, most likely Roxy, another Kingsman who went through the training program with him and has seemed to have genuine chemistry with. They probably shared like 4 minutes of interactions in this film, and I felt a better connection between those two than him and his actual wife. And then she just dies. If anyone needed to be revived, it should have been her instead of Harry. She was starting off her journey as a Kingsman, still having a lot more to explore, as well as it would have been nice to kickstart the renewed Kingsman program with 2 fresh faces. I guess with counterintuitive decisions such as this, I get why people don't see this film in the greatest light, because this movie sort of lost that balance the original had between knowing when to draw things out and knowing when to make that big, shocking play to catch people off guard. Having Harry still be alive is more anticlimactic than shocking. Murking almost everyone in the first act of the movie is more baffling than shocking. Having yet another agent double-cross their organization is more expected than shocking. Just that idea of pulling out everything, even if it doesn't make sense to draw something out of the crowd, is very reminiscent of those very spy films they tend to poke fun at in this franchise. Eggsy and Harry end up apprehending Poppy Adams at her hideout, in which the final showdown takes place. Eggsy finally puts an end to Charlie and his antics. Harry shows that the most powerful tool someone can have is their mind, and Elton John's there too, still standing of course. We then get to the second boss battle, as not all of the statesmen are good. One of them in fact is evil, yeah, go figure. After beating the rogue statesman and saving the day, they head home to rebuild the Kingsman organization with the help of a new ally. Questionable decisions aside, I really like the idea of the statesman, contrasting that posh style of their overseas counterparts with more gritty or rough movements during their action sequences. I would even go on to state that Channing Tatum as the statesman of Agent Tequila, while getting very limited screen time, was my favorite performance in this film, which was the last thing I would expect going into this. While Kingsman The Golden Circle is definitely a step down in regards to quality, it retains much semblance in regards to entertainment and comedy that it still makes for an enjoyable time. The Kingsman. The third and most recent installment coming out in 2021 sees us taking a step back to focus on the formation of the original Kingsman team. Screw Eggsy and his wedding, we are now looking at how a 55-year-old man's efforts led to the UK taking a dub during World War I. The Kingsman, which I will now be referring as Kingsman 3 to prevent any confusion, is drastically off the scale when comparing it to its predecessors. It's like having a smoothie and then dropping strawberries and then some cranberries and then dropping some tomatoes. Technically, it's still classified as a red fruit, but experience and taste would tell you a completely different story. Kingsman 3 is just a major tonal shift from the previous, having less of that comedic undertone and actually featuring real people and real events of the past. Still, we have that hint of that comic book dramatization, especially in regards to some fights, but it's just far and few in between compared to the pure grittiness it carries. The Kingsman title is practically the only thing that correlates this movie to the others, and yet this movie is still pretty good in its own right. Many people would even argue a step in the right direction after Kingsman: The Golden Circle. This prequel follows the conflict that sparks World War I, playing on the real-life familial affairs between Germany, Russia, and England. Orlando Oxford is our new protagonist, a former soldier turned pacifist after seeing the true horrors that war can accomplish. After having his wife die from an ambush, he makes her one last promise that their son may never experience the suffering of warfare. This initiates a primary conflict between Oxford and his son Conrad, who he himself takes his mother's death as inspiration to become a soldier to protect others. Oxford is called into action when conflict between the cousins-like countries of Germany, Russia, and England bubbles over, leading to a war upon us. World War I. However, he just can't go back to his life as a ruthless soldier, so he instead takes action behind the scenes with the original group of Kingsmen before they were the Kingsmen. Members include Oxford, his servant Shola, his maid Polly, and eventually his son Conrad. As far as the big bad, it's another corrupt organization, and this time it's filled with some recognizable names, yet not recognizable in the sense that they were mentioned in the previous release, but because they were composed of famous and infamous names of the past. Names including that of Mata Hari, Alfred Dupont, Vladimir Lenin, and Grigory Rasputin. These names and more comprise a group known as the Shepherd's Flock, who, through their mass political influence, plan on starting World War I as a way to topple England. Now, all for one major exception, these antagonists only reassure the colder look this movie held. We aren't looking at goofy Samuel L. Jackson with a lisp anymore, or a random redhead who likes John Lennon. These are actually real people who did quite horrific things in real life, and they don't really water down these horrific actions through ludicrous characterizations. And then you have Rasputin. Look, listen, this brooding feel isn't something that turns me off from the movie at all, because it's pretty well done, but it also puts a huge spotlight when you have that one guy who felt like he was plucked right out of a cartoon, because Rasputin was all over the place. If it wasn't him licking people's wounds and seemingly knowing how to perform magic, it's him hitting 1,000 spins per fight, all while thinking about who he's going to take back to his house that night. And guess what? I loved every second of it. This character honestly felt like the creators wanted to go full-on serious, but choked halfway and needed some sort of exception to maintain their sanity. And it works out perfectly, as not only are we able to enjoy that signature Kingsman character dramatization, but enjoy it in such limited amounts so that the original vision isn't lost in the process. Back to the good guys, Conrad ends up using some underhand tactics to join the war efforts without Orlando's permission, feeling at this point that being a soldier is connected to his pride, being a way to justify to himself that he isn't just some coddled rich kid, but rather a brave warrior such as his father. That will he, won't he, in regards to if he'll survive the front lines or not, is some of the best dramatic timing that I've seen from the series. A spectacular comeback from the Golden Circle. We see Conrad's come to that understanding of what his father has been preaching all along, and the senselessness of violence, and we are long gone from the cool camera angles of people doing flips with cool technology anymore, left only with the raw and brutal harm of one person taking another's life. Conrad triumphantly storms through the battlefield to retrieve information so important that it could turn the tide of the war itself, and ends up beating the odds, surviving shot after shot, escaping by the skin of his teeth. He is regarded as a hero for his bravery and his actions, and after such a traumatic experience, he doesn't even think that he can carry on his service either, so going back home is the main goal on his mind. And then he dies, murked by a paranoid soldier on his own side, effectively becoming the biggest thing that his father was afraid of, in that of a senseless loss of life due to battle. I told you, this movie gets pretty dark. It takes a lot of grieving and a reality check from Poppy, but Oxford eventually gains back control of himself after his son's death, and is more determined than ever to bring this war to an end. And he does so, destroying the political hold that the Shepherd's Flock has over America, effectively allowing them to join the war effort to bring World War I to a close. And at the end, formally developing the first wave of soldiers behind the scenes, officially known as the Kingsmen. Kingsman 3 is the black sheep of the family so far, but I am all for the changes. It strays away from what the Kingsman feels like, but replaces it with such a gut-wrenching feeling on top of maintaining those important cinematic qualities that truly matter. It shows that I can trust this franchise to change up its style but continue to produce entertaining and engaging results. The Kingsman franchise is like that kid that you always see playing basketball, and they always boast about NBA dreams in public, but then you actually talk to them in person and realize that they're really into poetry as well. You would never expect that a relatively comedic, elements of a parody spy franchise would use their extravagance to explore different social political issues from a ton of different perspectives as well. If it's not not talking about the corruption of wealth, it's reflecting on the war on drugs. If not that, then expanding upon the conflict of war. If not that, explaining the dangers of political influences, and so on and so forth. Something that a 2-minute TikTok of a fight scene fails to truly capture. Something that even a video like this, in which I dedicate to the franchise, fails to completely capture. So I highly advise anyone who hasn't to go and check these original releases. Better get with the program before the hype train starts to build up anymore, as several sequels are already in the works as we speak. As for the confirmed projects, you have Kingsman 4 or Kingsman Blue Blood, which seemingly finds us revisiting the original gang of Eggsy and Harry to take on a new threat. We also have talks of a potential Statesman TV series, which is definitely something I'm looking forward to, as that has quite possibly been my favorite expansion of this series so far. As far as what I hope to see in the future, maybe it would be nice to see the Kingsman organization to actually seem, you know, organized. This group has only been seen to be united in one movie, and that was their creation. I get that having a full squad of super weapons can lead to some issues plot-wise, but the title of the Kingsman looks more to be associated with bad luck more than anything. The Kingsman series is just a wonderful experience to be had, and I'm of course going to be first in line for any future endeavors.